Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast. On the show today, I welcome Mark O'Donnell. I love his first name. All Marks are rocking roll stars. The visionary and CEO of EOS Worldwide. With over 15 years of experience in leadership and business growth, Mark has guided numerous companies in implementing the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, to streamline operations, enhance culture, and drive sustainable growth. His mission is to help entrepreneurs and leadership teams get what they want from their business through a comprehensive system of simple, practical tools. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark. And it is a good name.
Yes, it is. And so Mark sent me his book, and full disclosure, I have not read this. The reason why, almost every one of my guests sends me their book, and I just don't have, I wish I could spend 8 hours reading books, but that's not practical. But he also sent me something in a little package, a little different. He sent me sunflower seeds, and I've got to find out the story behind this. My wife, she was so excited to get the sunflower seeds. We planted them in our backyards near our fence. My wife is 5'4", and the sunflower seeds are taller than she is now. So she's really excited about it. They're blooming now. We live in Houston, Texas. So what is the deal with the sunflowers?
Well, when we were writing the book and we were thinking about how we would launch the book and do the pre-sales, the marketing team kind of came up with a concept like, hey, building teams, building cultures, it's sort of like a flower. And so you plant it, it starts to grow just a little bit, and then eventually it grows big and tall and has a nice flower at the end of it, and you get to enjoy it. But you got to maintain it and care for it. Otherwise, it dies pretty quickly.
Yeah, these things are really tall. And matter of fact, the other day I was out there and one of the flowers had fallen over to the side, and I picked it up, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to stand up straight, and it did it on its own. It's absolutely incredible. So thank you for making our backyard look a little prettier. And I'm sure all the bees and all those other stinging insects are really appreciative. As long as they're eating the sunflowers and they're not eating me, I'm all good with that. So
perfect.
Your book is called People, Dare to Build an Intentional Culture. I got to believe it's about having a harmonious culture where you work. We all know Jim Collins talks about having the right people in the right seat, in the right bus, going the right direction. And that's something I think a lot of people, when they start, they'll take any warm body, but then they get to a point where they're stalling because they may have great teammates, but they're in the wrong seat. In other words, they're doing the wrong role.
Yeah. And that's really, we take a deep dive into right people, right seats in the entrepreneurial operating system. And we find that about 80% or so of all issues that are experienced inside of a business have a person's face at the root of those issues. And sometimes it's our own. But if we can get all the right people in the right seats, we can execute on our vision and we can get what we want from that. And the people can live out their purpose and be quite fulfilled. And so we talk about in the book culture types. And just as you said, like you will pulse check hired, right? That's kind of where we think when we start. And when you do that, it's low on intentionality and it can be healthy, but most often it turns not to be. So we call it a happy accident when you've got a healthy culture, but you have no intentionality behind it, where you've hired your family members and your friends from college and you really love one another and you get along and you can produce, but it doesn't scale because if you hire people from outside of that tight knit, it'll fail pretty quickly. And then the other thing, which is more common, is a chaotic culture where there's no intentionality, there's gossip abounding, and you've got water cooler talk happening. Pockets of healthy, but you didn't do it on purpose. And then above from that, you have a high intentional culture, but it's not healthy at all. And so we call that command and control, where people are looked at as replaceable parts and very transactional, and a high turnover exists in those types of companies. But then we have that intentional culture, high intentionality, very healthy. And that's where we're trying to get companies to build that intentional culture that endures any market, any economy, any changes that are occurring from a technological perspective. And that's what intentional culture is all about.
You mentioned something I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's we could be in the wrong seat. We are the owner, maybe we're the solopreneur. And I'll give you a real life example. My wife works with me in the business. And so I will record this interview with you. And then once I hit stop recording and we disconnect the call, she handles everything from there. She does the editing. She puts it up on Spotify. She puts it up on LinkedIn. She does everything because that's not what I should be doing. I am the face of the brand. I am Mr. Productivity. So I do content creation. I coach clients. I do podcast interviews, whether on my show or someone else's show. And what happens is if I get lazy, I start getting away from my core responsibilities, what I'm really good at, start doing her job. And fortunately, she will come up to me and say, what are you doing? Why are you working on the website? Why are you doing this, that, and the other thing? Because that's not what I should be doing. And I think whether you're a solopreneur or you're an entrepreneur, the small team or a big team, you need to figure out what you should be doing. And then you need to delegate the rest of the stuff. I think a lot of people are like me when I started. I was a control freak. I can do it better. And I remember having to write down the standing operating procedures for my wife because it was all in my head. I knew how to do it, but she's like, I don't know how to edit the podcast. But I sat down and I wrote down the SOPs. Now she does it all on her own. So I think it's a really big deal that whether you're a leader of a big company or a small team, you got to make sure, are you doing the right things? And if you're not sure, you need to start there before you start pushing things out to the rest of your team, correct?
For sure. I couldn't agree more. And the way I look at it, and when we wrote the book, is that you are the only you. You're not the only Mark, but you're the only you that has ever existed and ever will exist. And so you are unique, you are different than everyone else, and you have your sweet spot, your God-given talents. And to the degree that you can first uncover what those are and recognize them, then the next trick is to stay there and delegate everything else to their unique ability, God-given talent. So all the things that your wife is really good at, or if you're on a team, whatever it might be, you're giving away everything that is not in your sweet spot. And you're really doubling down on what you can be the best in the world at and bring out that uniqueness. So we have lots of tools and processes to help people do that, but it's really about doing that at scale. And if we can gather around a common mission and everyone operating in their sweet spot, really a magical culture can be created out of that. And what you're also doing is you're kind of breaking down the construct of company, because our job is to just unlock that sweet spot for everyone around us, including ourselves. And if it's them working for another company, that's great. If it's working for us on our mission, that's great too. And so you just sort of end up with this, complete collaborative environment where you're just trying to get people in the right spot.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about a toxic culture. And if you're working with your spouse, you can have a toxic culture, because I don't have the patience of Job in the Bible. I'm very impatient. My wife is very patient. So when I have an issue, I know what I should do. I should step away from the problem and let her come in, because she's really good at diagnosing things and fixing things and troubleshooting things. I'm like, fix it now. And she goes, I don't even know what the problem is yet. So I want people to understand, you don't have to have a team to have a toxic culture. If you have one other person in your organization, you can also have a toxic culture. And you got to be careful, because as a productivity guy, I can tell you, when you have toxicity in any environment, your productivity is going to take a hit, because you cannot be productive and be toxic at the same time.
You really can't. And so much time is wasted in gossip and in job protecting and politicking and all those different things, just talking about each other because you don't share core values. And I think at the heart of a healthy, intentional core culture is core values, a simple set of common guiding principles and beliefs that are at the center of who you are, whether you're a company of one or a company of 1,000, and you're hiring and firing and reviewing and rewarding and recognizing your people around those core values, that's how you build a culture over time, even if it's just one person or even your customers, because you could be working with people who just don't share your core values. They're your customers. You need them for cash flow. But if you can, ideally, you're going to be working with just those that do share your core values, and everything's going to be much smoother, much more efficient, much more productive and profitable.
I want to be very delicate how I ask you this next question, because we're recording this in September 2024. We have a major election that is going to be happening pretty soon. And a lot of people are conflicting at work, and it's got nothing to do with job responsibilities, being in the right seat on the right bus. It has to do with political stuff. And when you're working for a company, no matter how large or small, I think you need to leave that outside the office doors, unless you're going for someone who is maybe working for the Trump campaign or the Harris campaign. Everything else, I think they should be like Switzerland. Just keep the politics out of it, because if you're not thinking about it, if you're a leader and then you allow this to infect your company, well, now people are now bickering about the election. You're like, this company has nothing to do with that. And so I think you have to get control of that really quickly. As a leader, you have to say, look, we don't talk about A, B, C, D, and E at this company. You could do it outside in your own time, but here we don't do that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Unless that's your job. Because what's happening in the world, people are sort of letting go of the core values and the mission that they're on. And it's just a distraction. Mm-hmm. It is outside of why you were put here on this earth to do a particular thing with your purpose, your cause, your passion as a company. The rest is just noise. And so when you put, and with politics in general, it's obviously a measure of control, but it's really, how do we accomplish the goal? How do we live out these core values? How do we execute on this mission, assuming we're on the same one? The rest is just noise.
That's so true, because noise is a distraction, as well, contributes to a toxic culture. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's got to start with the leader. So I'm a big European football fan, and I was watching a match recently where the referee didn't. And as a result, players started doing things they normally wouldn't have done, because they figured, well, Johnny did it, so I can do it. And the match became a mess. And whether you're a referee or you're a leader of a company, it starts with you, because people are looking at you. And if you are talking about this thing and it's a toxic thing, well, then your team members or your employees are going to look, oh, the boss did it, so I can do it. So I believe you got to start as a leader and say, these are the boundaries, these are the rules, and then lead by example. And that way, if someone goes off the rails, you can say, hey, we don't talk about that like here. I don't talk that way. Now you have a base to stand on. But if the leader is kind of like passive and just lets things happen until it explodes, well, now you have a bigger problem.
As Warren Bennis said, and I'm paraphrasing, is that it's really not about the message. It's the fact that the leader is the message. So it's not the message you deliver, it's that you are it, right? Everybody is watching every single thing that you do. And we owe it to our people to give absolute clear direction, to give them all the resources they need to do their job and do it well. And as you said earlier, we got to let go of the vine. That once we've delegated something to someone, we can't jump in and micromanage them. As long as they're the right people in the right seats, we should be able to let that go. And that's hard sometimes, because there's a little personal identity wrapped up in some of the things that we do. And you just got to walk the talk. As go you, so go they. And if you talk about the leader, but then you've got your leadership team, and cracks in the leadership team look like canyons to the rest of the business. And so you got to be really tight on the same page. And that requires a ton of intentionality to do that. So you got to act with the greater good in mind. And what I mean by the greater good is we use a 2-page strategic vision and plan called the Vision Traction Organizer. And you've got to have that clearly articulated. and it's really multiplied by every word of the VTO and genuine care and concern for each one of your people. So same page on the vision, absolute clarity, and it's multiplied by genuine care and concern for every one of your people. And that's what the greater good is all about inside your business. And if you take that approach, everyone is crystal clear on where you're going, how you're going to get there. And they know you care about them and finding and unlocking their full potential, whether it's with you or with somebody else.
I was fired back in July 2005 from my corporate job, so I have not worked in the corporate environment since then. But I don't remember there being as much diversity when I was working in corporate America. I mean, maybe I was blind to it. I don't know. But nowadays, there seems to be so much diversity, and a leader has to deal with this because you have this group over here who has these beliefs and this group has these beliefs. And of course, the more people you have on your team, the more diversity issues you may have. And I think that's something that is going to take someone with a lot of skill and leadership. So I don't believe just anybody can be a leader. You got to be able to navigate the sea of diversity that we live in here in 2024.
Yeah. And I think when I think about that as a leader, it's really, again, as I said earlier, the acknowledgement that every human is the only one of them and that has ever existed and ever will. And as Emerson said, as I walk down the street, everyone that I pass is my superior in some way and that I learn from them. If you take that approach systemically in your culture and the way you talk to your people, the way you train and hire people, that everyone has that common belief, the externalities no longer matter. And it's just finding fit within the company so that we can bring out the best in everyone. And you're managing each person the same, but very much as an individual with unique talents and gifts that we're trying to bring out, if that makes sense.
What are some things you would tell a new prospective leader? Let's say they went in and decided they're going to form this company. They're going to start hiring people for various roles. What are some things you would want them to know to reduce the chances that they may have a problem down the line?
Well, I think one is to understand the clear distinction between what leadership is and what management is, because they're two totally different skill sets. And not everybody is hardwired to be able to do both equally well. Most entrepreneurs are very, very good at leadership, pretty darn poor at management and holding people accountable. And if you can do management really well and leadership really well, people will become accountable. So to understand the distinction between those two, I think is really important. And the second thing I would say is know thyself, because you can't manage your people, you can't lead your people if you don't really understand where you start and where you stop. You can only know other people in direct proportion to that which you know yourself. So do the work to understand who you are and where your strengths are, and amplify those strengths and delegate the weaknesses to the best of your ability.
You mentioned something a few minutes ago in passing, and I want to go back to it, accountability. Yeah. I think accountability is so powerful, because if you're not being held accountable to somebody, I don't think it's going to end well. So even if you're the leader, you need to have an accountability coach, a mentor, a board of directors, someone that's going to hold you accountable, because the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, and you probably know more about this than I do, if you're a leader and you're not held accountable, then you may start doing things that are not aligning with your vision. You may start doing things that your employees are going to rebel against, because you're like, you hired me to do A, but now the mission's going over here and I'm confused. So I think accountability is required for anybody, whether you're a leader or you're just on the front lines.
Yeah, I think that the way I talk about this and the way all of our EOS implementers talk about this is that accountability isn't something you do to someone. It is a result of great leadership and great management. So great leadership plus great management equals accountability. And it does start with your ability to be consistent, to walk the talk, as I said, and I think that there's 5 things you got to do to be a great leader, and there's 5 things you got to do to be a great manager. Number 1, to be a great leader, you got to give clear direction. Totally clear direction. You have that compelling vision. You're providing the necessary tools, the resources, because once everyone's clear on where you're going and how you're going to get there, you got to provide them with the tools, the training, the tech, the people, your time and attention that you're spending with your folks. You're letting go of the vine. You're delegating, as I said. You're acting with the greater good in mind. And then you're taking what we refer to as clarity breaks, just getting out from the fray, all the noise that's going on. You just go and journal, sit by a lake and just let the thoughts flow, get really clear and simplify your thoughts as opposed to all the stuff that's going on. You could kind of get pretty tangled up, and then you're not going to communicate very clearly. So those are the 5 core things to be a great leader. And of course, there's like 100,000 books on leadership here. So it's kind of simplifying it down. And then for management, you got to keep your expectations crystal clear, what yours are for the company, what your direct reports' expectations are. You're communicating well. I think George Bernard Shaw said the biggest issue in communication is the illusion that it occurred. So what's on each other's mind? You have no assumptions whatsoever. You have the right meeting pulse. You're meeting regularly. You're not letting people off. You have a clear meeting pulse. And so you have that regular quarterly conversation going on. And then I think the last thing is that you're rewarding and recognizing your people. So you're observing those core values that we talked about, the good behaviors, and you are really rewarding people and praising them in public, and you're criticizing and correcting them in private. As a result of doing those 10 total things, you're going to end up to have a very accountable company and team. It's a little bit about self-leadership and self-management as well.
I love those. And you also hinted around expectations. So my last corporate job, I would have to go to these monthly meetings where I worked for a local hospital here in Houston, and they had an offsite warehouse. So I would have to drive over to the main complex, park my car, make my way up to the meeting room. And of course, it was a networking event in the beginning, talking to people for 10, 15 minutes. We're having coffee and Danish and soda and what have you. And then we review the meeting that we went to last month. And 99% of the time, I'm like, why am I even here? Because my boss was there. Why am I here? And so I would get further behind. And I think as a leader, you have to think about, okay, what are the expectations I have for my employees? And do they need to go to this meeting? I'll never forget one of the stories I heard of Steve Jobs. This is in Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, I believe. It was about when he's talking about the iPad, and there's like 5 or 6 people in the room. And as he's talking, he stopped and he looked at this woman. He goes, "What are you doing here?" That's not a good leadership model there. But she says, "Well, my boss told me to come here." And he goes, "Well, we will not be needing you." And he waited for her to get up and leave, because Steve knew that you only have the people who absolutely need to be in the meeting and nobody else, because you have more people. Number one, they're not getting their jobs done. But number two, they may not have anything to contribute. So they're paying someone to not contribute. So I think as a leader, before you start having meetings and you have someone who's a meeting planner who sets up all your corporate meetings or whatever, you got to sit there and say, okay, what's the expectation for this meeting? Who needs to be there? Now, sometimes maybe the entire company needs to be there. Sometimes maybe just managers on up. And so I think a leader has to do that. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a very fair assessment. I mean, meetings are an interesting thing, right? Because they can either be the biggest time wasters ever, or if done well, the best, most efficient use of time that you can possibly get. And so I think having a great meeting agenda where you've got the objectives set up front, you know exactly who needs to be there, who can contribute, who can move the needle, who can solve issues, who has information that you might need, that you expect to have. And then we talk about 2 roles in any meeting. You have the person facilitating and running it, and then you have the scribe. And if you rely on one person to do both, it's kind of very difficult to do. And there's basically dead space while they're writing instead of talking. And so, it's highly inefficient. But if you spend half the time of your meeting creating an issues list and solving those issues at the root so they go away forever, creating to-dos that come out of those solves with 7-day actions, you know exactly who's doing what for the next 7 days, you're going to have a highly, highly efficient, highly productive meeting. But if you don't do those things, what people tend to do is they just discuss the living daylights out of things.
Yep.
Maybe it's cathartic, I guess, and they kind of feel good and like the experience, but they never got anything done, never solved anything. And so those issues just keep on coming back to haunt you again and again, over and over. And, meetings tend to be spectator sports as well. And people like to bring their laptops into meetings, which I always find fun. And the reality is they're bringing their laptop so they can do other work while other people talk.
I've seen that way too many times.
Oh, for sure.
This has been an incredible conversation. You gave us so much information, but is there anything you didn't get a chance to share with us before we talk about your book?
Well, I think when we talk about the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, it is, and I think all productivity is this, and I love your thought on this, is that EOS is a system for managing human energy. And when I look at, and yes, it's self-management, but it's mainly team and accomplishing a goal together. And so that's what we're designed to do, is that every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it produces, which W. Edwards Deming had said, and I think it's true. What are your thoughts on productivity at any level? Would you agree that it is a system for managing your human energy or a group of people's human energy?
Oh, 100%. But here's the thing I want to make sure people understand, that so many people are rushing in to be more productive or to lead a team. And I always tell people to pause and think about what you're going to do. Think about what you're doing. Is it going to move the needle forward? This applies to whether you're a solopreneur, a small entrepreneur, or have a big company. So many people are rushing into things, and then they turn around and look at it's chaos behind them because they rushed. There's no rush. I would rather you take a few extra days or a few extra weeks and make sure that you have clarity. We've talked about clarity several times during the show. Before moving forward, I see a lot of people making decisions like the house is on fire. And what happens is that affects the productivity. Then you have to go back and do it over again. Had you taken some time to slow down, and first of all, as a leader, make sure you are okay with everything, then your next level of management and so forth, down to the frontline workers. But I see one of the biggest problems people have with productivity, they're in a hurry. Maybe they want to hurry so they go back on TikTok or whatever. But you got to slow down. I think we need to slow down. If people just slow down, I think you may look at it, well, I'm not being as productive because I'm slowing down. Yeah, but in the long run, you won't have to redo the work because you took the time to slow down and looked at it. Oh, wait a minute. If I keep on this path, I'm going to be way off my target. You can correct it early enough. But if you rush instead of waiting, then you get down 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so far off target. Yeah. That's so it goes, it's counter to what most people want to do in the 2024. And as we about ready to hit 2025, let's do it fast. Who cares how good it is? But then you have to redo it, and people they're not stopping to think about, they're going to have to redo it. So why not slow down and do it right to begin with?
Yeah. It brings to mind, as you're saying that, when I go slow, I go fast kind of thing. And I've been a member of Strategic Coach for the better part of a decade, and they have a tool called the impact filter. Have you used the tool?
No, sir.
Yeah, it is. So you start off with, what's the project? And then you say, okay, well, what's the impact that this is going to have? What's the ideal outcome? What does the successful end look like? What's the worst thing that can happen if I don't do this? What's the best thing that can happen if I do? And then listing out 8 success criteria. And I think it's so powerful because what ends up happening when I do this activity, you're really selling yourself first on this particular idea. And I can't tell you how many times I get to the end, I'm like, this is a really stupid idea. Like, I'm just not going to do this. But in the past, I would have just pushed it forward and started working on it week, 2 weeks doing it, only to find out like, oh, well, that was dumb. And this way you kind of save yourself and the team some pain and suffering by selling yourself on the idea before you get started.
I've heard of people say, do the 7 whys. So I'm going to do this. Why? Because why? And if you go 7 whys deep, you're either going to go, I am all sold out, or you're going to go, yeah, why am I doing this? But again, people are in a hurry.
For sure.
Because we live in a microwave society. And I'll be honest with you, Mark. Sometimes I'm like one of the guy, I'm like, I got to cook a TV dinner. I don't call them TV dinners anymore. They call them frozen dinners. Back in my day, I'm 59. They used to call them TV dinners. When you didn't have microwaves, it's like 3 minutes. Normally it used take you 45 minutes. We're always in a hurry. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Yeah, if you're a firefighter, a policeman, emergency room doctor, you need to hurry because that's what the situation requires. But most of us can afford to step back. And I even know some paramedics, some doctors who work in the emergency room, and even the critical care case, sometimes they step back for like 5 seconds just to make sure they understand the situation, because they may think it's the arm, but an issue with neck. So I believe in every situation, you need to stop and make sure you understand the situation fully before going on and making a mistake.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, when's the last time you've been bored?
I hate being bored. Even though Cal Newport says embrace the boredom.
Yeah.
My wife and I have this joke, and she edits my podcast, so she knows what I'm going to say. Well, she will fall asleep on the couch when she's resting her eyes. And I'll leave the TV on, but then I pull out my laptop and I'm like networking on LinkedIn or doing something. I can't just sit there and do nothing. I identify as Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. And if you don't know who that is, go Google it. I've got to be doing something. I'm very active. I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my battery's almost dead. But that's the way I roll. But I need to take more time to be bored, because I think being bored is healthy when you're not doing anything. And we live in a culture where the internet's streaming 24/7. I mean, everything, there's something going on every minute of every day. I remember in a day where the TV would go off at midnight. It wouldn't come back on at 6 o'clock in the morning. There was no podcast, no streaming music. You had to go buy the album. And stores used to close. Right. And I think we're mentally healthier back then, because there were times in our life where we had to, we can't do anything. I remember the blue laws, a lot of people are going to go, blue laws.
What is that?
Google. I mean, there are times like Chick-fil-A, they're closed on Sundays. I think that'd be healthy for all of us. The Bible calls it a Sabbath, but you don't have to be a Christian to believe that. But I think maybe we should take a day off once a week and just say, I'm not going to be on social media, because you can schedule your posts. Don't be on social media. Don't watch TV. So if you're a big fan of sports, maybe not pick Sunday for American football or something. But I think that would be really good for us mentally if we would just take a day off, maybe read, go to a park, go on a picnic, do something where our brains could just go, oh my gosh, I don't have to think for a moment.
Yeah, I tell my kids, imagine the advantage you would have with the ability to look up in a world that is looking down. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Next time driving, it's red light, and there's someone next to you. They are incapable of not looking at their phone at a stop sign or a red light. Go to the airport. You walk around. When's the last time you saw someone's eyeballs in an airport? They're looking at their phone the entire time as they're sort of zombieing around. And so my thought is, to your point, imagine the advantage you'd have being able to look up, to be able to be bored in a world that is looking down and not thinking deeply about anything. And I read a book recently called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And it can be a life-changing book, and some people are not going to agree with everything that's in there, of course, but he does talk about taking a Sabbath, putting your phone away for a 24-hour period, and kind of what happened to him in his journey doing that. It would create an advantage where you can look up in a world that's looking down.
Thank you for the book recommendation. I told you before we started recording, I'm addicted to reading. I haven't gotten your book yet because there's so many books I'm reading.
So many.
I'm reading 4 books right now, and I just love reading. And I live in Houston, so I like going out in my backyard, taking my shirt off, letting the sun hit my skin, putting the bare feet on the ground and reading. It's just so magical. And in the world that is moving at warp speed, I think there's something to be said about just not doing anything. And a lot of people are like, but no, you need, because this is the epidemic. People are always doing something where our bodies, we have pains and we have aches and we have, heart, chest pains, whatever. That's because you're not giving your body a chance to rest. So give your body a break and watch your productivity improve, by the way. And again, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I'm going to pick that book up because I don't go to Amazon for my book recommendations. I get it from people like you, because you've read the book and you recommended it, so I'll go pick it up. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
The book is called People Dare to Build an Intentional Culture. You probably get this at Amazon, but where do you want people to go to learn more about you and what you're doing in the world?
Sure. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the fastest, easiest way to do that. You can go to eosworldwide.com and check out what we're doing there, and you can get the book from there as well.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show and sharing your information, a ton of information here. I mean, folks, don't forget there's no law. You can listen to this podcast as many times you want. Maybe you're out on a walk or a run or something like that, and you didn't have something to write with. Go back home, listen to it again, and take notes, because he gave you a lot of information. And after you go to Mark's website and you go buy Mark's book, go to my website, MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com. And we'll be back real soon with a brand new episode. Until then, stay productive, but stay positive.